Peace be upon you. How are you, O Algalon? O God, I will be supported by me. I will thank you. Thank you anyway. I wish you watching Howla Iskander. His Excellency, the story is an amusing. He said to him, Naim al-Muna is not satisfied with one, and he said to him, he said, to be the sake of our eyes we looked at them, and renewed the mention of death and do not forget the hereafter. And the love of the world goes from our hearts. We do not work for the worship of our Lord. Iskander said, how do you eat cannabis? He said, because we hate to make our stomachs for animals, and because the food is not exceeding the throat. And then I extend his hand and brought him out of the hunt from the head of Adami and put it in the hands of Alexander, and he said to him, he said, no. The man said, the owner of the king of the world, and they will be. And for them and the weakness of his time in collecting the wreckage of the world. And Allah has hurt his soul, and make fire based in this head. Then and put another palvan in his hands and told them, I know this? He said, no. He said, this was the kings of the earth, and he was fair in his witness, lounge on his mandate and his king. God hurt his soul and dwell in his jewel and raise his destination and put his hand on top of the centuries and said, you see any two? The village of the 2 centuries is very crying and in his chest, and he cried with an oar and said to him, if you wanted to do so, he said, because the creation is all of them enemies. Because of the money and the king I gave, and all of them are in fact because of the conviction and his silver, and praise be made between his eyes, and he knew that the king did not stay in the end of the king, such as the end of the despicable in the later. And whoever owns the money is someone who does not come from God in the end. The Pember will come together. I wish the story. Then he said to him, the bliss of the world is not satisfying to anyone. And Iskander said to him with astonishment, why did you dig graves at your gates? He said, to be in our minds, then we look at them. We renew the mention of death and do not forget the hereafter. And the love of the world goes from our hearts. So we do not work with it on the worship of our Lord Almighty. Iskander said, how do you eat cannabis? He said, because we hate to make our stomachs the graves of animals, and because the pleasure of food does not extend beyond the throat. Then he stretched out his hand and took out a cranial out of Adam's head. He said, no. The man replied, saying, the owner of it was one of the kings of the world, who oppressed his subjects, and he pardoned them in the weak and devoted his time in collecting the wreckage of the world. So God captured his soul, and made the fire his headquarters, and this is his head. Then he stretched and put another cranium in his hands and said to him, do you know this? He said, no. He said, this was one of the kings of the earth. And Dul-Qarnayn cried very loudly and attached him to his chest. crying with sigh, and said to him, "If you wanted to," he said that to him. He said, "Because all creation are your enemies, because of the money and the property that I gave. And all of them are really my friends because of contentment and grief. Because I have no king nor greed in this world, nor do I ever request to it. Nor are there any gods, and the mask is not according to." Alexander annexed him to his chest and kissed him, but so he knew that the king does not remain, and the end of the king is like the end of the despicable and the traumatic. So whoever possesses money is like some bring the two together. In the end, I hope the story will be your wonder and you have benefited from something useful in life. Your work is the rest, and our end is all one, and waited for me with a new story.